administration. Joining us now is the author of the Great American Political Trivia Challenge, Rich Rubino. Rich, it is great to see you. So let's dive right into this feud, between Elon Musk, the president now, the vice president. When he appeared to first hear some of these tweets coming from Elon Musk, he predicted this would not spell good news for him. How do you see this playing out? What is your analysis of some of the Democratic Party now wanting to court Musk to their side?
Yes, well, it certainly is something that certainly is advantageous for the Democratic Party. Not only can they exploit the feud between the two, but potentially in a Congress where there are currently 13 Democrats who represent congressional districts that voted for Trump last time. They want that money to go towards some of those Democrats to get them reelected. Democrats like Jared Golden in Maine, for example, Henry Cuellar in Texas. Anything that Elon Musk can potentially do to benefit the Democratic Party is certainly something that I think the Democratic high command right now is probably having meetings behind closed doors and trying to figure out how they can somehow cultivate him and how they can also obviously exploit the tensions between the two men.
So this public feud, it's all stemming from Musk's disapproval of the big, beautiful bill, which is heading through the Senate now. Do you see his comments having an impact as this bill does move through the Senate? Might some of his comments embolden senators who have been outspoken against the spending as well?
I think it does. I think it lends a certain amount of credence. There's some senators like Rand Paul, who's more libertarian than conservative, who is very much opposed to this legislation. At least he's opposed to the idea of raising the debt limit. Then you have conservatives like Rick Scott of Florida or Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who I think are also very incredulous, if you will, toward this legislation. It just puts in the news every time you hear about it. You hear Elon Musk talking, you hear a different view than Donald Trump in terms of the debt and the deficit. He's basically saying that this legislation has a lot of largesse, a lot of pork barrel spending in the legislation, and he is suggesting that this will actually balloon the deficit and balloon the debt. And I think Donald Trump wants to go on the offensive and to make the argument that this will not actually balloon the deficit or balloon the debt. And as he says, at least in Donald Trump's opinion, it might be the most significant piece of legislation in American history. That's according to Donald Trump.
I want to get this in as well. Let's pivot to this ongoing probe into President Biden's health while in office. Yeah. We now have a White House doctor from the Obama administration saying President Biden's physician did not properly assess his fitness for office. So if that is deemed to be true, or if it's found that elements of his physical or mental state were intentionally kept secret, private from the public, do you see major ramifications for the party as a whole?
I do, and if you listen to the Democrats, their basic argument is we need to move on. They talk about Donald Trump, and they talk about Donald Trump's foibles, so they say essentially we need to move on away from Joe Biden. I think this often happens certainly with one-term presidents, whether it was Jimmy Carter in 1981 when he left, George H.W. Bush in 1993, the party tends to move on. I don't think anybody is really portraying themselves that I know of as a quote-unquote Joe Biden Democrat. But obviously Republicans are going to try to keep Joe Biden in the news as much as possible. Biden will have an updated autobiography coming out next year ahead of the midterm elections, where he tries to elucidate about his term in office. And I think that the Republicans are really salivating, if you will, on this appearing in the news. It reminds me a little bit of back in 1976 when Richard Nixon went to China. Ronald Reagan was running against Gerald Ford, and this put in the news the fact that Nixon was going to China. People remember that Ford had pardoned Nixon, and this helped to really propel Ronald Reagan's campaign. So this is certainly bad news for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and then you have questions about the auto pen, the executive orders. I wish we had more time. Rich Rubino, thank you as always for weighing in.
Thank you so much for having me on again.